The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
Yeah, we are back to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but believe me, tonight we're going to make it worth your while. As opposed to any other night. Every other night we just wing it, see what happens. No, thank you guys. We have a very special guest with us, and he's kind enough to call in tonight. So without further ado, tonight my guest is Mr. Matt Sullivan, founder of LITA Records. Matt, are you there with us?
I'm here. Thanks for having me. How you guys
Thank you so much for being with us. I apologize for the late start here.
No problem.
I become really fascinated with this story of Jim Sullivan. I know that you're head of this record label based out of Washington that recently re-released its album titled UFO, and the story behind the album and the man, it's really fascinating. And I wanted to ask you, can you take us to the beginning? How did you hear about Jim Sullivan, his album, and his mysterious disappearance?
Yeah, a few years back, I was on a website called Waxidermy. It's a music blog where people, it tends to focus on underground records, a lot of self-released albums, called private press records, meaning artists who, usually paid for a record themselves or, self-released it at least. And years later, a music collector finds it in a, Goodwill somewhere and uploads some audio onto Waxidermy, and there's a message board, people chat about the records. It's really fascinating, and it's a great place to discover music that's off the radar, and everything from folk to heavy metal to, every type of music in between. A lot of old music we're referring to, things from, 60s, 70s, things even before that. So I was on there one day just snooping around looking for records, and came across the Jim Sullivan record. Enjoyed it. Looked like the look of the cover, and a good album cover goes a long way. So I clicked.
Totally.
Started listening. There was the record was up there, just kind of MP3s, and the guy who found the record had kind of a little few paragraphs up, and I started listening to it and was immediately just mesmerized. I mean, I started Light in the Attic about 12 years ago. We're a reissue record label primarily, and we're always looking for records that are off the radar, just things that we enjoy. Sometimes really all types of music, and this was kind of a dream thing of hearing something like this and enjoying the music. And then from there, started kind of, as I'm listening to the album for the first time, scrolling down the page, and by this time it's probably 08 or 09 maybe, and the post had been up in 06. So I'm reading 50 posts or something that go over 2 years, and halfway down the page, people are primarily just saying the first time you're hearing this, loving it. Halfway down the page, Jim Sullivan's family posts. This is they're the first people who kind of have anything to do with Jim that are posting, and they say how excited they are that his music's being heard, and they kind of go into the story. So that was where I discovered that. But I mean, just to go back, the record is really just, it's such a incredible, that was my, interest in it, was in the music. And the story is phenomenal. Really the music holds up. It's been, since 1969, right,
recorded in Los Angeles. And so, we're talking 45 years ago at this, now in 2014, and just a phenomenal mix of folk and country music and psychedelic rock, and great playing and songwriting and his lyrics and voice. It really is a weird mix of styles as well. It had Earl Palmer on drums, who heard on loads of hit songs, and it had kind of almost like a psychedelic soul vibe to it, mixed with country music, and it was something I hadn't heard or heard a lot, and something I really enjoyed.
From what we know about Jim Sullivan, and it's thankfully through you taking the time to research and investigate Jim, is that he was a quite popular singer out here in Southern California. He would frequently play at a bar in Malibu, correct? Apparently he had quite the buzz going at the time.
Yeah, he had a buzz within within some of the beach communities and some of these kind of, good little places to play. There's a place called the Raft out in Malibu, as you mentioned, and there's a place where like Lee Marvin and Farrah Fawcett and all these, kind of Hollywood stars would hang out. And again, this is late 60s, early 70s, and other places. But he was just, he was a struggling artist. He was trying to make it. And he had other things, he had a little bit part in the film Easy Rider. So he had these kind of brushes with fame, hung out with Harry Dean Stanton. He had kind of these moments, but, and playing at the Raft was one of his key places.
When he put out this record, UFO, it wasn't the success that I guess he expected. This was a self-financed effort. I mean, this is like indie before the term indie kind of existed.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It was financed by two Texas, Al Dobbs and a friend of his who came out to, pretty much from Texas, who came out to L.A., in their words, to discover the hippie life. And they ended up going to the Raft as, just fans and enjoyed Jim's playing. And so they ended up having money, and they ended up putting down the money to make the record. We ended up finding Al and interviewed him a lot about the reissue. And, so they were the ones that, really got the ball rolling in terms of a recording contract or a recording, arrangement. And then, that's really, when I was listening to the record and then found out that all these legendary players are on it, the thing that really threw me off is how did, this private press self-released record end up with, these, heavyweight players who were getting paid, good money. So, Al still had the receipts, and I think they spent, it was about $17,000 in '69 on the record.
Wow.
So, considerable amount of money.
Yeah.
I feel like it was something around there, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a few years, but, yeah.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, they had some legendary players, commonly known as the Wrecking Crew, right? And they were Phil Spector's go-to guys when it came to session musicians. And I must say, Earl Palmer's drums are absolutely amazing on this record. It has kind of like the old school mix where the whole drum kit is pan hard right, I believe, in this recording.
Yeah.
And you can really appreciate the drumming. And from what I read, also, you did this excellent write-up for the blog, Aquarium Drunkard, kind of detailing this story. Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. And in it, you mentioned that the bass player, Jimmy Bond. Yeah, he did all the orchestration and the arrangements, which are, from a musician standpoint, it wasn't your typical folky type of music. They were being really experimental, it sounds like.
Yeah, they were. It was, I think, not at all what Jim had expected. Interviewing his family a lot and his friends, that I think the record kind of went in a completely different direction. But I think at the time, that was kind of, more of the time where you'd have a singer-songwriter and, you hook up with a really good arranger and, production and a good studio, and things kind of went in more of a, tripped out way in a way. But I guess as we were kind of mentioned earlier, just the mixing of styles where, you have Earl Palmer, David Axelrod and all those classic records. And you mentioned the Wrecking Crew. Don Randy was on keyboards, he's on, these guys, Jimmy Bond, for example, he's on everything, I think, from Nina Simone's first recordings to Chet Baker to, I think he's on Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
These guys are just like, heavyweights. But there was something kind of, it kind of added a lot of like the strings, definitely Jimmy Bond's arrangements, and also the bass players you mentioned had kind of this eerie quality to them, which really, it has kind of a melancholy vibe over the whole record. And with Jim's lyrics and kind of what he's talking about or singing about, it brings it up to a whole nother level. So, I think Jim was probably hoping just to make a singer-songwriter record, him and a guitar, or him in a three-piece or something. But I think it's pretty unique where the songwriting really comes out and the production doesn't kill the songwriting. And sometimes I don't feel like it's an overproduced record at all.
And I believe, from what I was reading, that there was another release of this album. I believe, was it Mooney?
The first one was on Monty Records.
Okay.
And then this is one thing that really threw me off, and we still haven't got a lot of, it's been years and still haven't got a lot of explanation of this, but that record came out in about August '69. It was catalog 003, Monty Records, and then it was called UFO. The artist name was Jim Sullivan. And then about 6 months or so later, somewhere in there, we think March 1970 is what I've been told, the record was re-released on a label that was a little bigger, like it was a real record label called Century City. It had a few releases, and
they changed the name. They called it was a self-titled album, and then the track order I believe was altered a little. The cover was totally different. It was a big kind of close-up of Jim's face, a big gatefold cover. And then most importantly is the mix was totally different. The Monty mix was, as you mentioned, Earl Palmer's drums, the bass, some of those elements were way up in the mix, almost like a David Axelrod record, as mentioned earlier. And then in the Century City record, the mix is, the bass and, those key players is way down and Jim's vocals are way up. And it became more of it sounds more like a singer-songwriter record, which was really interesting. And I think, we've interviewed the Century City people, and a lot of people, and it's hilarious. The Century City people don't remember the UFO record.
Really?
And a lot of the UFO people behind the UFO record don't totally remember the other record. I mean, they both just disappeared before they were even, the UFO album, I don't think it was ever even shrink wrapped. I think it was used as a demo. I mean, the original cover has a picture of Jim, which is the original cover we went with. Original picture of a small little photo of Jim, kind of like a psychedelic looking thing, and no text, nothing on the cover. The spine had no text. There was not a copyright logo. There wasn't a year. There wasn't a track list, zero. It's just baby blue, just it. And then they pull out the record, and the label just had, the song titles and I think Monty. So Century City one was a real release, but it's one thing that really threw us off, it's one of the many questions we still have about the project, and we spent a lot of time with Jim's family, and they've helped uncover some clues, but his whole life, at least in that point, had a lot of mysterious things happening.
Why don't you tell me what your thoughts were when you heard Jerome, the title, or the opening track, I should say, off of his release, UFO. Like you said earlier, you didn't know about his story. You just heard the music, and you felt quite attracted to it, as it were. Why don't you tell me what were your thoughts when you first heard Jerome?
Yeah, it's just, when I first heard it, I didn't know what it was really about. It's about Jerome, Arizona, the mining town. I think it's up north, kind of the Flagstaff area, I believe, somewhere up there. We meant to drive through on our way to New Mexico when we were researching about Jim's last known whereabouts. We did not get there, but Jim had a sister who was born in Jerome. That was what the song was about, and just about a lot of the lyrics on UFO, the album, or about the desert and disappearing, death, and quite a few other subjects. But, what really struck me when first hearing the Jerome tune was just, talked about a little earlier, just the playing, his voice, melancholy, kind of just a cinematic vibe to the whole record that really starts there and just it slowly works its way through. And it's just one of those kind of things you can't really put your finger on, or so you just keep listening to it and staring at that album cover and wondering, what the hell is going on? What's it about?
When this record came out, obviously it didn't get the commercial success that I guess Jim and people in his team was expecting. And a few years later, I believe 1975, he decided to head to Nashville, correct? Tennessee?
Yeah, correct. He had some family who was out there doing session work. And I think he just felt that he wasn't making it in LA, and he had a better shot of making it in Nashville because he was, his music was a little more country-esque. It was a little more, had more of a country vibe. And it was just better, he had a better chance as what he was doing maybe to probably be a songwriter. It just didn't pan out.
It was in this trip where things took an unexpected turn. From what we know and the information that you've gathered, he left on March 4th for Nashville from LA. That night, he was pulled over by a state trooper, I believe. Yeah. And apparently he was driving, he was not driving properly. And
he'd been driving 15 hours straight. So he was exhausted. He'd been driving straight from LA in his little VW Bug by himself.
The state trooper let him go, and he checked into a motel in New Mexico, correct?
Yeah, he was in Santa Rosa, which is a little town about 2 hours between Albuquerque and West Texas on Route 66, the classic little old-timey highway. Yeah. 2,000 people, 27, same population. So the police officer thought he was drunk, so they took him to the police station for a sobriety test. And then they told him to check into the local motel and get some rest, because I think he He's trying to get to Nashville as quick as he could.
We know that he checked in, and the next day, it seems like he headed out to continue his drive, and that is pretty much the last thing we know of Jim Sullivan, right? And this is where I said the mystery kind of begins, because when I talk about disappearing in the desert, like he sings, I don't know if this is one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, or was it a premonition that he had? I mean, I don't know, but he leaves the motel. A few hours later, they find his car, and I wasn't quite sure if it was found on the side of the road, in the middle of the road, but all his belongings were still in the car.
Yeah, it was found, the car was found 26 miles outside this little teeny town called Santa Rosa. I mean, this is a really tiny town. When we went out there in 2010 to get to where his car disappeared, we drove about 20 minutes on a dirt road. Probably saw either two houses and saw maybe one car.
Wow.
And I mean, it's very remote. So when his car was found, it was abandoned. The car was dead. The battery was dead. And it was in the middle of the road. A bunch of locals who were working out, would pass by that way, doing, work out in the desert at the time that we interviewed in 2010. They confirmed that. And then also the police reports, or at least the missing person reports, talked about, the car being dead when it was found. But yes, as you mentioned, his wallet was in the car, his keys were in the car, most of his belongings, some of his LPs were in the car, some tapes. And then he also, I believe his guitar was either in the car or the hotel room. I can't recall, but he had a couple of things that were in the hotel room as well. The hotel room bed seemed like, according to what everyone said, that it looked like it was never really slept in. But by the time his car was found, I think it was the next day. It's a ways out there. So, I mean, the theory is he, checks in the motel, gets his sleep, or hangs out there, does whatever, and bought a bottle of vodka. Then he drove around, and somehow he ended up out there. I think just probably cruising around. I think realistically, the locals probably gave him a lot of hell for being, looking kind of like a Hell's Angel and a hippie with long hair and with a jacket.
Right.
Being 1975, it was like remote New Mexico, and it's possible that would probably happen today as well. But I mean, it's talk about premonition. I mean, he was an Easy Rider in the film, and I mean, what that movie? I mean, it's similar.
Right.
Long-haired hippies end up in small-town America, and they get murdered. I mean, it's just kind of a, it's a different time then. Not to say it's perfect for now, but I think that's a possibility. But I don't. Maybe we'll wait a second to talk about that. But yeah, when his car was found, it was out there in the middle of nowhere, and the strange thing is there was different stories we heard, and no one could really clarify them. His car was found next to this ranch owned by the Genettis, who were a local family who lived out there. And the Genettis, there's one story that said Jim walked up to the door of their house. And again, this was in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There probably wasn't a house within, I'm guessing, a mile or two of the Genettis at the time, but I could be wrong, but, pretty remote. Knocks on the door, and Miss Genetti comes out, only speaks Italian. Jim probably asking for help for his car, is my guess, because it's not working. That they don't understand each other, and he takes off. Another story said that it was so flat out there, she saw his headlights from a distance and came down with a ranch hand in her car and asked help. And it kind of says, as a smart ass, like, no, do you need help or something? And that's kind of the end of it. The Genettis had rumors tied to the mob, which no one could really confirm, but like a bunch of locals literally believe that. And we weren't able to interview the Genettis. They supposedly moved within like a year or so of Jim's appearance. It's a small town, and rumors happen. We went out there though, and I mean, we met a lot of the locals. I mean, one thing that's really interesting is the local newspaper, the Guadalupe County Communicator, this great little newspaper, literally has a circulation of 2,000. It's a weekly newspaper, the only newspaper in the area, and it's pretty cool to have a circulation of 2,000. There's 2,700 people that live there. Pretty much everybody reads the newspaper. Davey Delgado, who was one of literally 3 employees at the newspaper in 2010, he was a kid then, or a teenager, and he remembered, he was probably about 16, 17 at the time in high school, and he remembered
everything. He took us all around town, introduced a lot of locals. So he helped out with a lot of the research at the time.
Okay.
We were doing. So much stuff we had was just kind of hearsay. But Davey took us around to the local newspaper archive, which was great. I think at the time it was the Santa Rosa News, I believe it was called, in 1975. And there was just big binders in the back room of this little office of all the newspapers from 20 or 30 up until the time it went under. So we flipped to March 75 and we start finding a lot of old articles about the disappearance. And, the fascinating thing, I didn't realize, but it was, 2 years of search parties all across New Mexico trying to find Jim and his whereabouts. One article in particular I'll never forget was I think the first article we found, man found in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and it matched his, height, weight, look. And so people thought maybe it was Jim. And we flip a few more pages, a few more weeks down or a few more days down. And then it says that, the local sheriff, Santa Rosa sheriff, went out to Las Cruces, looked at the body, and it had similarities, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't Jim. And I mean, we were flipping through, I remember even getting to 77, and there was a full-on statewide search involving all the state troopers and everything, and still nothing. They didn't find a thing.
This is a bit mind-boggling because here we have a talented musician, down on his luck, leaves his family behind to go to Nashville, disappears, and all we're left is this record that just, it becomes really eerie when you know this information and you listen to a record where he's singing about practically word for word what happened to him. He drives out to the desert and disappears, and there's a melancholy in his voice. There's a bit of despair, and his weathered voice just conveys such emotion when he sings. I mean, you listen to Highways and even UFO, and I think that's where the speculation comes that some people believe, and I think a lot of people would want to believe that, as fantastic as it sounds, that Jim's dream came true.
I was going to say, you're totally right. I mean, it sounds crazy, especially for people who haven't heard the record. But a lot of what he's singing about, it is a strange premonition, and the record's 5-6 years before its appearance, so it is a little. And he did release other music.
Yeah, didn't he release one under the Playboy label? I was reading in your write-up.
Yeah, Playboy, magazine had a pretty cool label in the 70s called Playboy, and he had a record on Playboy. It was self-titled. It was about 72 or so. So we're still talking a few years before the disappearance, but he was down on his luck, and there are a lot of possibilities. He might have been murdered. There's the UFO thing. Could still be alive. I mean, he could have just, he might have, on the other hand, walked out in the desert and said, I'm not making it. My life, I'm in the pits. My life's not going anywhere. I'm just going to, walk out in the desert and die. I mean, personally, I think sadly, he was probably murdered by, the locals, probably made someone mad there, or they didn't like him or didn't like his long hair or something. And they exchanged some words and that was it. But I don't know. I mean, there's, his wife, she's wonderful. And she, feels that, she obviously likes the idea that hopefully UFOs got him.
Yeah.
It's a happier ending.
Right.
Than being murdered. But, it's a strange, a really strange tale that, it's funny, when I went out there with New Mexico, I went out there with two filmmakers, Jennifer Moss and Mel Eslin, and we kind of, being naive, just, it's funny thinking about it now, but we really thought, like, maybe we'll uncover something out there, or something like that. And I feel like more could be uncovered if there really was, you have the opportunity to maybe stay in New Mexico for a few months. I think there are some more stones to, look under.
It's funny because, reading this, you wrote this story, as I mentioned earlier. You said that, I believe it was his room, the number was 0003, right? Which was the catalog number for his album. And you felt that that was kind of like a sign of some sort.
Yeah, there were a lot of weird signs when we were doing the reissue. The room is actually Jimmy Bond's house in L.A., producer, arranger, bassist. He lived in an apartment building, and I went there to try to find him, which took me ages to find this guy, which shouldn't have been, but it did. And so his unit number on his apartment building, just this specific unit, was 0003, and it just was like, I don't know, one of these just tripped up things of like same catalog number, and it would have been, it was like a 4-unit apartment building. Like, why are it 3 zeros and a 3? And
right.
I'm just like, dorky record nerd, like, these things are just like blowing my mind. And then also the apartment building itself, the complex was 370, which was, the month and year that the Century City album came out. Strange coincidence. But when you do these kind of projects or anything in life, sometimes you see enough of those things and think, does that mean something?
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's always kind of weird and eerie. And there were a lot of those types of things during the project. I mean, just kind of funny that when I started listening to the album, I liked the cover and then clicked and started listening to it, and then soon see like, oh, the guy's name's Jim Sullivan. My last name's Sullivan.
Right. And there's no relation, right?
Obviously. No relation.
Okay.
Obviously not the most unique name, but, just weird things like that,
mm-hmm.
that, I don't know what they all mean, but, there's definitely been a bunch of strange things, parallels with this project that make me think that I'm drawn to it for some reason. I don't know. I mean, for me, we put out maybe 150 records in 12 years. 98% of them are reissues, and every one of them I'm a huge fan of and love. But there's something about this album that is just the music. I mean, just really never leaves me. I mean, it's just such a magical record.
And I also want to let people know that, like you mentioned earlier, you went down to New Mexico with filmmaker Jennifer Moss, and you guys made this short documentary, if you will, a little over 5 minutes long, and you kind of summarized the story of Jim Sullivan's disappearance in this documentary. It's great. I love the way you guys shot it, and you show Jim's wife and his son. And we get to kind of see with our own eyes some of these places and some of the people involved. When you were talking to his wife, I don't know if this came up in the conversation, but do you know if what Jim's beliefs were as far as like UFOs and aliens? I know at the time it was the whole hippie movement, LSD, Tim Leary, turn on, tune in, and drop out. A lot of people were kind of flirting with the idea of there being more to life. Do you know if Jim was just one more hippie in the crowd, if you will?
No, I mean, I've talked to Barbara, Jim's wife, about that a lot. I mean, she really was. She wanted to clarify she wasn't some like crazy alien obsessive person, nor was Jim. But they definitely believe that or were spiritual people and believe that they were open to ideas and they had an open mind. They mentioned. I remember her mentioning she was, her and Jim would sometimes sit on the beach and look up at the stars and wonder, what's out there. Talked about sometimes they were into the work of Edward Casey.
Yeah.
One of the first kind of known psychics of the 20th
mm-hmm.
century, or one at least that really pushed those theories. I think he was died in the 40s, I believe. So, I mean, this was pretty early on. I mean, she mentioned she was, both of them were big into his work and writings and his philosophies, but the record's called UFO, so obviously there's you can look at it any way you want with that, but I think that's a fair assumption to feel that they had interest in that there were questions out there.
Yeah,
not gonna answer.
If people haven't checked this record out, definitely do. From the cover to the music, it's definitely a fascinating work of art. I love it from beginning to end, and I want to thank you for bringing this record to everybody, because I feel that otherwise, this record would have gone unnoticed.
Thank you. I mean, thanks to the guys also at, Wax Jeremy, for turning us on the record, and
absolutely
everybody who helped out on the reissue, Andrea Lyle, and Jim's family, of course. And it's really been like, it's been a surreal journey, and it's far from over. I mean, we just saw Jim's son and his son's wife last weekend, and they've become really close with our family, and I really want to continue releasing Jim's music and kind of shining a light on his work. And I think he was really on to some great work, and would have been interesting to see what he would have done next. But there is fortunately he has music there that will live on.
Before I let you go, why don't you tell us a little bit about LITA Records?
Yeah, we're based in Seattle and Los Angeles, and we've been around since 2002 and put out records, a lot of reissues, things from Serge Gainsbourg to Betty Davis, Karen Dalton to Chris Christopherson's demos, more obscure artists like Jim Sullivan, Donnie and Joe Emerson, a lot of soul records to country to psychedelic rock and early hip hop. And for us, it's just, thank you, the archival process of records like Jim's that are just, never really got their due is, it's really, we feel it's important. And, especially when these artists or their families or people that played on them are here to share and kind of tell these stories while they can be archived. And, some stuff we've done has been a bit more, like Serge Gainsbourg, Lee Hazelwood, obviously artists that, did find some success within their financial success within their lifetime, while other artists like Donnie and Joe Emerson or Jim Sullivan, hadn't. So, they're finding a new audience now, and for us, that's just it's important. So we do, CD and vinyl and iTunes on our titles, and put a lot of emphasis on liner notes and photos, and like I said, the archival process. And you can find us on the web, lightintheattic.net, records and Amoeba and all the key, record stores around the globe. And I really appreciate you listening. And I should mention the Jim Sullivan doc, if people want to watch it, the short, it's on YouTube. I think if you search Jim Sullivan's story, I think it comes up.
Yeah, I believe me, I've been posting that video quite a bit because I think it's fascinating. Trust me. And if you will excuse me while I geek out for a minute, I also found that you guys are the ones that reissued the Rodriguez records, right? From the way I was introduced to Rodriguez was watching Searching for Sugar Man. I think flew under everybody's radar. What fascinates me, and when we go to break here, I want to play one of Rodriguez's tracks, the one titled Sugar Man, because there's a very interesting musical interlude in Sugar Man where there's this crazy panning going on. You have the vocal on one side and the reverb on the other, and it creates this amazing effect. So I want to thank you for releasing those records. I mean, they're fascinating. I'm falling in love with Rodriguez as well. I mean, if anybody hasn't listened to that
Cold Fact and Coming From Reality, those two albums, I mean, I feel honored to be involved with those records. We reissued them in 2008 and then 2009, the second one. And so we've been involved with his records and the Searching for Sugar Man soundtrack. And it's been phenomenal to watch kind of growth and people find those albums. But I mean, Cold Facts definitely, and the Jim Sullivan record, I'd say, are 2 or 3 of the records we've ever released that are like all flavor so on. It's like, if you don't like this, you're just an asshole.
Right?
Sorry. I just,
no, it's true.
Kids who are like 15 to like people who are 75, like everyone can listen to those and be like, God, these are really special records. I can see things in our catalog that maybe aren't for everybody. But I mean, those things are just such special works of art. It's like, how could you not enjoy those? And it's nothing to do with me. It's like, those are just beautiful works of art that like need to be shared. And so it's nice to see people, latching onto those records and finding them in unique ways. And Mount Benjalou, who made the Searching for Sugar Man film, Cody did such an incredible job and has really helped. That film came out a few years after our reissues, and it's really helped Rodriguez's music reach even another, audience out there. So I'm happy you dug the film and been into the music. Thank you.
No, thank you. Really, what you're doing is totally amazing. It's one of the best jobs in the world, I must say, being able to discover this music that has been long forgotten and bringing it to people and allowing us to rediscover it and enjoy it and help it live on. I mean, it would be a tragedy if these things were lost to time. So I want to thank you, Matt, for what you do and for calling into the show tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having the support, and thanks for everyone listening.
So there you have it, folks. Matt Sullivan from LITA Records. Thank you guys for watching. Take care. Be safe. God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. Enjoy your Cinco de Mayo. Don't drink and drive, please. We want to see you back next weekend. This is Rodriguez. Crucify Your Mind. Enjoy.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.